Hello, everyone, and welcome to the HGC Post-Show number 4. I can't believe there's already been 4 of these. Quick recap. Doing it again. Quick recap for the week. For the format of the show, we look at each individual region, see which matches got played, where the current standings are at, and then we recommend one, usually just one, best of series for each region. We're actually going to start with China tonight. So E-Star Gaming, no longer in the top spot. They are both teams, Challenge Everything and E-Star Gaming, are 5-1, but Challenge Everything actually took a 3-0 set off E-Star Gaming. I said this last week when I didn't even recommend a game for China. I was like, if you want to watch China, only watch it when one of these 3 teams are playing against each other, because every other match is going to be pretty weird or stompy or just not very interesting. And it hasn't really changed, but this week it was. We had a beautiful match. Where is it? Where'd it go? Am I crazy? Challenge Everything versus E-Star Gaming. It's right there. It's a little bit weird for China because it happens after the regular HGC, but technically that is their week. So it was quite a while ago now. Overall, you can see it was played 8 days ago at this point, but this was a really close series despite the fact that it was a 3-0. If you want to watch one series from this week of China, I encourage you to watch that one. Again, showcasing some of the different heroes that they have in their meta, the different understanding of the draft, but it was just a really, really solid game. Kiss and Start Over Again are relegated to the Crucible, I believe. I don't think there's any way they can get out of it. There's no, there may be some distant possibilities, but as long as most of the matches go as they're expected to in the 8-7-6 slots, then those 2 teams are the ones going to the Crucible for China. I think that's pretty much confirmed. Korea. So yesterday I actually did a commentary / cast of the set that I would recommend, MB Black versus L5. I did cast the entire set. I managed to avoid spoilers just by not going onto Reddit. So to me, the series was amazing and surprising. A lot of people watching already knew the result. But MB Black versus L5, if you're going to watch one matchup for Korea this week, that is the one to watch. MB Black started out with a 2-0, and L5 actually pulled off the reverse sweep. It was absolutely crazy. That is the set to watch by far. Nothing else was even worth commenting on, to be honest. HGC Europe, this is again another really, really easy one. It is Team Dignitas versus Fnatic. Again, a reverse sweep. We had 2 reverse sweeps this weekend with 2 of the top teams in the regions playing against each other. So this is an easy one. Team Dignitas versus Fnatic, 100%. Team Liquid versus Team Expert. If you like EU, I would encourage you to watch this game because you can start to see the cracks in Team Liquid and the way that they don't feel comfortable in a lot of cases with newer metas, and it can be a struggle for them to adapt to particularly innovative drafting. Splendor was the pro a few months ago. He's the drafter for Team Liquid, who commented on the fact that drafting seems like it's too important. He made the analogy of HOTS being like chess boxing. You play a really intense game of chess, and that's the draft, and then you go box for a bit. But who wins the chess game in many ways determines if you have a featherweight versus a heavyweight in the boxing match. And he didn't like that. He wanted it to always be, no matter how badly the draft went, you would always have a heavyweight versus a heavyweight. So Team Liquid is aware of the importance of drafting, and they struggle with it in some metas and not in others. So it's an interesting series if you check it out. If you pay particular attention to drafts, even if you don't actually watch the series, I would encourage you to watch the commentary on those drafts because Calder's commentary on them was really, really good. And for North America, my home region, I have to recommend Tempo Storm versus Gale Force Esports. Went against my team 3-1. They only managed to pull off one game. It was on Braxis. Their patented split push Zag strategy worked for them again. I believe they're currently undefeated with Zag on Braxis Holdout. Even though Tempo Storm had a really good response in the pickup of the Chromie, the pickup of the Chen, the pickup of the Thrall, I think they might have gone a little too into countering the Zag and then not had enough left to counter the the 4-man, which still existed. The 4-man was still there. That is definitely the series to watch. If you want to get more into the nitty-gritty of where the teams are at, you can also watch Superstars versus B-Step. This match confirms that I believe Superstars is going to be in the top 4. There's a small possibility that they don't end up in the top 4 if B-Step wins and I think Teammate loses one game, or it's No Tomorrow loses. Basically, B-Step doesn't beat Niantic, and then there's 2 sets that have to go in an unexpected direction for B-Step to pass up Superstars, which is they're both very unlikely. So Superstars is likely going to be the number 4 team going in to the step ladder playoffs. It's not 100% assured, and I believe No Tomorrow is now guaranteed to be in the Crucible. No Tomorrow and Niantic guaranteed to be in the Crucible. There's no way they can possibly get out of it. And that's where we're at with the results from this weekend. I keep trying to think of how I can have better production value for these shows. I haven't thought of a good idea yet. We only had 2 questions on Reddit this week because I did post the thread late. That's entirely my bad, 100% on me. But they were really, really good questions. So the first one is from Oyer Snacks. Dreadnought last night was talking about the difference between league teams, like Team Liquid in Part 1, and tournament teams, Dignitas. It seems to me that Korea doesn't seem to have that distinction. The good teams are just good, period. What, if anything, do you think contributes to that? I feel it could be the format they have with HGC being done in a facility anyway, and their league is basically a LAN. Thanks for doing shows every week. I really enjoy them. Well, thank you. It's a really good question, actually. It's a really good question. So what's the difference between a league team, a team that does well in an online event, and a team that does well at offline events? And there's 3 major factors here. The first one is preparation, and this applies even to the Korean scene, because they are only playing 1, maybe 2 best of 5s in a weekend. If you have an entire week and you know which team you're going up against, you're not going to scrim them. A lot of the top teams scrim against each other in a lot of cases. So we've had situations where a team lost their top scrim partner because they knew they were going to be going up against him. And then it was like, oh, well, we don't have our top scrim partner anymore. And then our practice this week isn't as good. And you lose an edge. You lose a competitive edge. So your practice can be better or worse in a league format based on who you're going up against. Because you're going to lose your scrim partner. If you're going to an international event, it's usually not a problem because you'll look at the bracket and you'll pair with a sister team. For instance, at BlizzCon, L5, then Ballistics, scrimmed Fnatic, and Dignitas scrimmed MVP Black. And they knew they wouldn't go up against each other in the brackets, or at least it was unlikely, based on the expected results. So, also, you can really structure your drafts. You can do replay analysis. You can try and figure out the weaknesses of a specific team. If I have, a full week to prepare for one team, then I'm going to be in a situation where I'm going to go into that knowing what drafts they like, knowing what heroes they like and which maps. I'm going to have structured my strategies to counter that specific team. And it gives players who have a real mind for the game and maybe aren't really mechanically gifted a really big window to be like, we're going to win the draft. We're going to win every single draft, and the game's going to be relatively easy. Splendor is an exceptionally good drafter. Caldor mentioned this and a lot of casters have mentioned this in the weeks of HGC coming on, but they gave Splendor the title of most improved player / most improved support in the professional world. He was not a good mechanical player the first year of his playing. He just wasn't. He missed cleanses constantly. They were late. He would miss heals. He would make small mistakes, and his team was still doing well. His team was still winning despite the fact that he had these problems mechanically. And the reason his team was winning is because he understands the game really well, and he's really good at drafting when he has enough prep time. He has a really good way of thinking about the game. I guess he's one of those people who's not necessarily naturally intuitive about the way the game works, but he puts in a lot of hours trying to understand the game. And in a tournament setting, or in a league setting rather, that's great. If you know you're preparing for one team and you can just grind it out and figure out really good counters, even if it takes, you a good part of your week that you're not scrimming, you're going to go into those sets and you're just going to be like, pew, you're just going to roll over people. And we saw that all of the first phase, right? All of first phase, Team Liquid pretty much rolled over everyone. And if you go back and look, it was mostly through superior drafting. So that's the first thing. Preparation for tournament teams. If you're a team that really wants to feel very prepared and that is how you win games, in a league setting, amazing. In a tournament setting, you're going to go through best of 5, 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 like over and over and over again, each against a different team. And one of the reasons that Team Liquid lost the first game against Nomia is they went in with zero prep. They literally had not studied that team at all, and they just drafted the most generic pub stomping comp on Infernal Shrines that you can possibly imagine, and then they got dumpstered because Nomia, it turns out, knows how to use VP. And they just didn't know that. They just let them have Zeratul when Zeratul was the cornerstone of every successful draft they had. And they lost to it because they didn't respect the team. It gives you an idea of how different the level of Team Liquid is in a situation where they're prepped versus a situation where they have not prepped. They can get dumpstered by a team from a minor region with no prep, whereas they can be the best team in EU if they're allowed to prep. That's the difference that Liquid experiences. Is this like when you talked about Glowering versus Rich? Yes, this is exactly the same thing. Rich is just a naturally gifted player in terms of mechanics. Whenever he means to do something, he does it. And it's difficult. It really is difficult to have really good judgment, but to always have your hero do exactly the thing you wanted them to do. Most people, they have to do long hours in try mode. I know for a fact that, for instance, Glaurung, who has a really clean Zeratul combo, practiced that in try mode quite a bit. He made his fingers learn it. Rich just did it one day. Rich is just absolutely crazy in the way he can pick up a hero and be really, really mechanically sound with it. And I actually firmly believe that Glaurung could be as good as Rich at certain hero. It would just take him longer. There's no substitute for hard work when it comes to being top tier at something, even if some people are more naturally gifted, they have a better inclination to certain things. And there's a lot of ways to be good at Heroes of the Storm, right? Splendor wasn't good mechanically. He worked really hard on it, but he had a really good affinity for drafting. Good enough that he was already on a professional team, even though he wasn't, on and on and on and on. There's just a lot of ways to be good at this game. A lot of ways to be good at this game. So preparation. It's a big one. You can't prep for a tournament the way you can for a league. You just can't do it. So teams that excel with preparation are going to be really good in leagues and maybe not are going to be really good in tournaments. And that's regardless of if it's an offline event or not. It doesn't apply to the Korean situation. The second one is I want to say it's psychological. It's a lot about mental stamina. If you know you're only playing one best of 5, you can go all out for that best of 5 and then take it off. We saw Misfits, for instance, perform really well at the EU qualifier for BlizzCon, and then they had to. It was a 1-1. There was a final set of games, and they just lost those games because they were so visibly tired. They'd played, I think, 15 games in a row at that point, and they were just done. Dignitas, Western Clash, played 15 games in a row. Didn't look tired at all. They looked fine. They were on point. There are people who just don't get tired the same way. You make them play long enough, they'll get tired, but they will continue to perform at roughly the same level hour after hour after hour. If you want to be a Hero League grinder, you kind of need to be someone who can perform hour after hour after hour. But if you want to be just someone who's really good at the game, you could play just 3 or 4 games a day and have them be perfect games where you do everything correctly. As long as you did a lot of replay review and maybe other sorts of training in the interim, you could potentially be a pro player that way. Be difficult. But the teams that really excel in focus and just stamina when it comes to playing and not getting mentally exhausted, they can just play and play and play and play and play, are obviously going to perform better in a tournament setting. In Dignitas, I think this is their greatest strength. If you watch Dignitas play, especially if you go back and watch their Western Clash games, they never drop off. There was never a point in their performance where they were like, zzz. In fact, they kind of ramped up. As the tournament goes on, they kind of get better and better and better. The 15th, 16th game in a row, man, the first 14 were just warm-ups. They're better in the 15th and 16th games. And that's a huge difference. It's a huge difference. It's just so enormous. So preparation, stamina, whether you want to think of it as emotional stamina, psychological stamina, physical stamina, people get tired. They do. Their hands get tired. Your fingers get tired. People, longtime professional gamers will always tell you that every few games you should stand up and stretch. You should always do as many hand stretches as possible. Day9 had an entire 30-minute episode back in the day on hand stretches and how often he would do them. And some players remember to do that. Some players don't. It makes a big difference in how long you can go without your hands getting tired and the muscles starting to cramp and get a cramp at the wrong time in the middle of a team fight. And it's like, my mouse didn't mean to go that way. Oh, we lost a team fight. It's happened. It's happened at world events to professional players in other games. I don't know if for a fact it's happened in HOTS, but I know for a fact it's happened in StarCraft. So, yeah. And think of how to put this. So we have preparation, we have that stamina, but we also just have not the opposite preparation, but the ability to just pull things out and make them work. Dignitas, when they pulled out that Stitches Tyrande Kael'thas strategy at Western Clash in the finals, they hadn't practiced that. I want to make that. They did an interview afterwards. They didn't practice that at all. They just knew how to play those heroes. It's something they'd done before about a year ago. That's a trick that comp that they'd practiced a year ago, but they hadn't done it in a long time. They dumpstered that game, right? That was not a close game. They just won it very handily on Tomb of the Spider Queen. So the ability to execute game after game after game, even things you haven't practiced, is huge. And it kind of ties into preparation. It kind of ties into psychology. And it's the thing that really separates Dignitas as a tournament team from other teams that are not necessarily as comfortable at tournaments. Fnatic's BlizzCon run, they had a week of scrims, running up to BlizzCon against L5. They were prepped. They knew exactly what they were doing, and they didn't prep for L5 at all. They were just like, we're going to beat MB Black. All their prep went into beating MB Black. They beat MB Black and then lost L5. So Fnatic, even though they got further at BlizzCon, didn't demonstrate that same sort of tenacity when in a tournament setting because they were focused solely on one match. And it's almost like a best of 5, right? So Fnatic and Liquid are sort of the top 2 league teams in EU, and Dignitas is definitely the best tournament team by far. And you can see the distinct differences. Fnatic and Liquid both require a certain amount of prep. They need to practice a comp to execute it really well. Whereas Dignitas is going to be like, can we do that? Yeah, we can do that. Let's do that. And then they'll win with it every time. There's a reason that JPL says that he's the best player on Dignitas, and there's a reason the rest of Dignitas doesn't argue with him. And it's just because JPL is so incredibly consistent. Bakery has a lot of stamina. He has a really good understanding of the game. And he can just be like, we're going to do this, we're going to do this, we're going to do this. And his team will always execute with him, even if they haven't practiced it. And that's just such a big difference. Such a cool dynamic. It's a really good question. But the second part of the question was essentially, why doesn't this exist in Korea? Why do the top teams in Korea seem to just be the top teams in Korea? And everything else, you have tournament teams. It does come partially down to the fact that there's a LAN event. LAN pressure is a big thing. Some people just aren't used to playing on stage. They get nervous. They don't play as well. That's a thing. Jet lag, food sickness, these are all factors that can come into play. They don't always come into play, but they can come into play quite convincingly. And but the biggest difference is that in Korea, it's a little bit more accepted. There's a certain amount of support. So if you're scrimming and getting that support and people aren't making fun of you for being a professional gamer or joking about it, there's a rule in psychology. It's called the 10-to-1 rule, where for every 10 good things you hear, if you hear one bad thing, you'll remember them evenly. And if you remember if 90% of the things you hear about yourself are good, and 10% of the things you hear about yourself are bad, but you're remembering them 50-50, that kind of sucks for your mental state, right? So in Korea, once you are a professional gamer, once you've made it and you're actually making money, people just like, yeah, that's something he's doing. It's fine. Whereas I think in every other region, including EU, most in NA, like by far the most in NA, you don't get positive feedback a lot, and that just affects your level of commitment because you're always questioning, oh, is this really what I want to be doing? Whether they say this and they say that. That's slightly speculative on my part. It's certainly backed by a certain amount of research, but I just genuinely think that in Korea, once you've made it as a professional player, people don't ask, oh, you're doing that. And it allows them to focus more on the game. They have a much more focused culture in that way. That makes sense. Second question from the thread is, judging from almost everyone saying it is a double support meta, but there were hardly any double support comps over the weekend. Any ideas as to why? This is actually a really good question. The way you beat double support, so double support is all about team fighting. A double support will outlast in a team fight and eventually win the objective, whatever the objective is. So double support's only going to be good on really strong objective maps where the objective itself is really, really important to winning the game and it'll give you a significant lead. Battlefield of Eternity and Infernal Shrines are the top two that come to mind instantly. Also Tomb of the Spider Queen to some degree because the objective is physically in lane, and so technically the entire time you're laning, you're fighting for the objective. If you're in lane on Tomb of the Spider Queen, you are fighting for the objective, either pushing with it, getting it, or depushing it. So those are the maps where we actually saw double support played, and double support won those maps for the most part. There's some exceptions. But the way you beat double support on any map that's not those maps is you just draft split push comps. You just draft split push comps, and generally speaking, double support does not have sufficient wave clear to deal with heavy split push, and eventually your buildings just all die and you lose the game. What have we seen on Cursed Hollow, Warhead Junction, kind of Towers of Doom to some degree, Dragonshire? We've seen split push comps. So you're not going to draft double support into a split push comp, and you're not going to draft double support on a map where the enemy team could just be like, oh, you drafted double support? We're going to draft split push and win. So, what are the early signs of certain team comps and how can you counter them? It's a really complicated question. That's like a very in-depth drafting question. And you always got to think about Dread always says this really well. It's one of the things that he has a really clear articulation of. What is your team capable of? And so when you see, like, let's say your second pick in a draft, and you see 3 heroes, that's 3/5 of the enemy team's comp. That's a lot of information. If you have, let's say they have Murden, Zagara. So they have Murden, Shen, Abathur on Dragonshire. What are they capable of? Well, they're going to have really good rotational picks because they're going to have a hat, which is a global presence, and Murden is the best hero for initiating picks on Dragonshire because of his ability to jump over the wall and hit a Stormbolt. They have a really dominant top laner in the form of Chen. Chen is 100% going to be in the top lane, no question. There's really not a hero that beats Chen in the lane, especially with a hat. I mean, there are some where you can argue it's a skill matchup. But you know they need support, right? You're not going to have a supportless comp in professional play. You can make an argument you might see a tankless comp someday. There have been a couple, like 3 or 4 throughout the entirety of professional play that won. But you're not going to have a supportless comp. So that you know they're going to pick up a healer in one of those 4 or 5 slots. Generally speaking, if you don't pick any ranged heroes, you're already behind. You need some sort of range to have defensive poke and to have pick potential. And if you have a Murden, obviously you want pick potential. So you know what the draft's capable of just from those 3 heroes, and you know what the last 2 picks are going to be in concept, right? You know the frame that they're trying to fill. So knowing what each individual hero is capable of is the way you understand what's happening in the draft and what a team is thinking. You know, certain heroes enable certain playstyles. You can't be a really aggressive ward if you have Arthas as your tank. He just can't control vision the same way because he doesn't have an escape. Whereas if you have Muradin is the best tank at controlling vision, period, because he has massive self-sustain in the form of Second Wind, and he has basically the best escape of any of the warriors. With a Nubrak Sparrow Charge is technically better because it's slightly longer range and it also goes under terrain. But yeah. So understand each individual hero, look at them and be like, okay, what can they do? What can those heroes do? What can they do together? What can they do on the map? It felt like GFE tried to mimic L5's comp on Warhead Junction. Obviously went wrong. Can you talk about specifically what went wrong? Where, when, and why? That's a detailed game analysis. So this is the game that's being asked about, Tempest Storm versus Gale Force Esports. And the comparison here is this game, L5. They did pick up... I'll put these together. Excuse me. So this comp was Lucio, Tyrael, Greymane, Illidan, Lunara versus Lunara, Tyrael, Illidan, and Tracer. The big difference between these two comps is Rhaegar is a strong independent hero who can lane and do camps by himself. Tyrael is never going to die if he's played well. He's just never going to die. He's always going to be in a situation where he can get away and do things. Illidan can do camps and solo lane really well. Lunara with Wisp is basically ungankable. If she's using Wisp to control vision, she can always maintain a lane, at least in terms of soaking it safely. And Tracer is a pick machine. Tracer can pick Li Ming and Falstad easily, constantly, every single time if they are in lane and Tracer plays well. Not even a matter of how well the other team plays. It's just if Tracer's perfect in her play, she's going to get the kill like every single time. We saw it again and again and again and again. Tempest Storm, Lucio, completely useless by himself. Lucio is dog shit by himself. He's literally one outside of Morales. Lucio is the worst support in the game when he doesn't have a team to heal around him. Greymane's okay by himself. Sometimes can solo camps, but he has to back. He has to make sure he has really good globe control. He has to tap frequently. It's not as good as, say, and he's not as good at Tracer at securing these really, really fragile picks because his initiation distance is much, much, much shorter. He can't get on top of people and kill them instantly the way Tracer can with the bomb. It's not the same dynamic. So completely independent, can all do things on their own on the biggest map in the game. Independent, kind of independent, independent, not independent. This is the problem right here. It was the Lucio pick. If this had been Rhaegar, and Rhaegar had done exactly the same thing that L5 had done in terms of just going around constantly soloing camps, this would have worked a lot better. A lot better. Missing that aspect of the game is pretty critical. And this was the L5 comp. Literally, the differences were Greymane for Tracer and Rhaegar instead of Lucio. The three other picks, Lunara, Tyrael, Illidan, were the same. Also, I believe that this was a Judgment game. This is a mistake. Judgment did really, really well for them in terms of initiation in previous sets. But when you're drafting Tyrael on a map like Warhead Junction, boss control is the primary reason you're doing it. Just boss control and his strong independence. You need Sanct to guarantee bosses so you don't get gusted off or booped off or cleansed, or someone gets cleansed on whatever. So yeah, this should have been Sanctification, and they should have drafted Tyrael purely for boss control, which is what L5 did. L5, oh, you're gonna do boss? You're gonna start a boss? That's interesting. We're gonna take that boss. That's our boss now. Thank you. And good night. What is this site? This is masterleague.net. This is essentially a HOTS logs for every professional Heroes of the Storm game ever. It started about a year ago. I use it literally every show that I do for the professional scene. I don't know how you don't know about it. I think there's a command for it in chat. Maybe. That's not wrong. It'd be ML. There we go. Yeah, there's a command for it in chat. It has a watch button, so if there's a VOD available, it will link you directly to the VOD. This is the first show I've watched. I'm a busy person. I'll be less busy. Enjoy more shows. So I did an entire commentary on this matchup yesterday because people asked me to. So the question in detail was, where did this go wrong for Gale Force? And let me make sure the scene's set up for this correctly. It's not. There we go. Pause it again, get rid of this. There we go. So we're going to keep an eye on Gale Force Esports. Bear in mind that Tempo Storm is a macro team and L5 is a macro team. So in the case of Gale Force Esports, it was a non-macro team, a team that's struggling to currently improve their macro versus the best macro team in the region. And in the previous thing, that was a macro team playing a very similar call. So a little bit of a brawl in the mid lane, whatever. We're actually going to move up to level 7 or 8, I think it is. We see, no, they're just pushing in. They have the Lucio for the sustain in the bottom lane. Notice that Lucio can't be in by himself, whereas in the L5 versus MB Black game, Lunara was always by herself, but Lucio is sticking to Lunara or Greymane, like always. Whereas before, with the other comp, Tracer would go off by herself and look for a pick, be a mobile ward on the Mac because of her escape potential. Lunara was in top lane by herself a ton. You can see the bomb. It's also worth noting that Tracer was taken by Tempo Storm. So Tempo Storm is the team that has this constant, oh my god, you're just going to die pick potential, as opposed to in the other game, L5 is the one that had that potential, and they had strong independent heroes who could just be everywhere on the map. I don't know why GFE is fighting so aggressively for this nuke. They have a camp pushing. They have this camp pushing in their top lane. Tempo Storm made a point of grabbing it. They're fighting really aggressively for a nuke that's not on their side of the map, mostly because they lost the other ones and they don't want to be 3 nukes to 1. They don't want to be in that situation. But they're not going to win with a relatively late game composition. I guess Illidan and Lucio and Tyrael are all relatively stable at this point in the game, but Lunara and Greymane are a little bit weak in the early game. And they do finally give it up, and someone has to back deal with this camp. I think that being on their side of the map and falling behind in experience was just a mistake. I don't think they ever should have done that. That was their first macro mistake, and they wanted to fight. They definitely feel like they have superior team fight mechanics. GFE, I think, has demonstrated that pretty well. They really have a lot of faith in their team fight mechanics, and so they want to fight, but they don't have the tools really to dominate a fight until 10, possibly until 16. So, waiting for it. And we see Tempo Storm just constantly grabbing camps. This camp I think was taken one time by MB Black in the L5 versus MB Black set. Otherwise L5 was just invading and constantly taking the camps. Camps were not allowed to be taken, and they were contested heavily because it gives you this insane map pressure. If your lanes are always pushed out, then you're always at a point where you're threatening buildings and the other team has to go back and push out their lanes. If your lanes are always like, in the middle, then either team can sort of do everything. But this is how you put macro pressure on people, is you have strong independent heroes, especially on big maps, and it forces their globals to always be pushing out the lane. And in some cases, if you gank the global, then suddenly the global's not there, your lane gets very pushed in, they have to rotate someone up there regularly. They went Judgment pretty much just for the Tracer, but they're not going to win boss control fights, and this fight ends before 16 even happens. Or the game ends before 16 even happens. That was a silly fight. So everyone's alive, they have 10, they feel like they need to fight, bearing in mind that when L5 drafted this comp, a very similar comp at least, it was macro-based. They wanted to not win fights, they wanted to win the map. Whereas Gale Force Esports is like, okay, we're behind, but we have 10, we should try and enforce a fight. Crone takes a lot of damage here, is going to end up going down. This is what we're talking about. This is the value of Tracer that L5 really demonstrated. Is she can just get these picks. And she ends up wasting Judgment by recalling out of it. Michael Udall cannot go in. They see Fan on the flank, end up getting that pick. Again, Greymane is not a strong independent hero. He needs a lot of support when he goes in because he has no self-sustain. Whereas everyone that L5 drafted is a strong independent hero. Is Judgment used outside of NA? How often? Judgment was not used at all outside of NA until just recently, but it was actually used in the L5 versus MB Black match on Towers of Doom. And I actually think we're at a point in the game after the buff to Judgment where if Tyrael's going to be your main tank and you need initiation, you go Judgment 100% of the time, especially against squishy heroes if you have follow-up. The follow-up is really critical. In the L5 game, it was Ragnaros with Smash. It was Judgment Smash, guaranteed to hit. We've seen Judgment Tracer Bomb, guaranteed to hit. Judgment Hunt isn't as good, but it's still like some follow-up. Tyrael's not going to 100 to 0 even a squishy target. Actually, there's some targets he can 100 to 0 if he does everything perfectly, but it's difficult. But in general, you just need to make sure there's someone on your team who can come in with you and do a lot of burst damage to make Judgment worthwhile. And then in the very late game, you take Angel of Justice at 20, and you can do that every 30 seconds. So Greymane is an okay follow-up to Judgment, but he has to be in position, and Fan was not. So the Judgment was preemptive, especially since Recall was still available. So that fight was just a mistake in many ways. I think the Judgment was intended to peel for Chrome, but Chrome was already dead because Bomb was on him and Sound Barrier wasn't there. Like, Lucio is the only person who could have made that save. Judgment was not going to make the save. Maybe they go for the counter kill. Like, they trade at least 1 for 1. And this is, again, at 16, Gale Force Esports wins the bosses kind of by default. Well, by default if they have Sank. But Holy Ground makes it really difficult, at least, even with the Gust. So Tempo Storm's like, oh, we got a kill? What if we just took the boss off the map? And this boss is going to respawn like right as they hit 16, but before Gale Force hits 16, which means by Tempo Storm picking up the boss now, they guarantee that Gale Force won't take it, and they guarantee that they can probably get it twice as long as they don't make any sort of mistakes. The nuke goes down just purely for the zoning. Trying to boop off the point, but Cocoon, Fury, pretty good. That's boss taken. And Gale Force Esports, again, demonstrating the fact that they have really good team fight mechanics, so close to securing so many of these kills, and it's just not quite enough. Judgment comes off of cooldown, they use it there, that ends up being a 2 for 2, but they lose the boss. And we're just going to go forward until the boss respawns here. There's a lot of other stuff that happens in the interim. Tempo Storm just absolutely continues to dominate this game through better mechanics, better understanding of the fight, or better understanding of the map. Actually, the boss never even respawns. But again, they get a talent tier advantage and they go for boss. They understand that bosses are Gale Force's win condition, in addition to just getting picks consistently and playing macro. And that's not what Gale Force did. They drafted a comp very similar to L5's, but did not play it the way L5 did. Pretty fundamental mistakes. That's actually a really good question. Thank you for that. One thing I wanted to talk about, no one asked this, but I wanted to talk about it, is Cassia. We're gonna do it. We're gonna talk about some Cassia. Didn't GFE start the second boss? Maybe they did. I'm gonna be honest, I don't remember. But maybe was that a desperation call? We can back up. I think you're right though. Yeah, they rotated top. They saw the camp grab bottom, and they were like, "Oh, let's just go to boss. We have Greymane." And TS came in with the talent. Actually, Dahaka soaked 16, so Dahaka stayed bottom until 16 was hit, and then came up. Actually, he didn't even come up. Dahaka's still down there. Okay, now he finally came up. But yeah, Emerald Wind, Gust wasn't good enough. They needed Sank Holy Ground. Like they needed Sank Holy Ground to have any chance at all of winning the way L5 did, and they didn't take those talents. So Cassia, we're going to go just the HGC games. 44 wins, 11 out of 25 matches. You had to go to the door and missed your question? I had such a good answer. So no one asked this, but Cassia. Cassia is, I think, Faye said this in her interview after the Superstars game. Dread and Gilly both asked where they thought or where she thought Cassia was in the meta. And Faye's response was Cassia may be the best assassin in the game, at least as good as Greymane. And Greymane is the top assassin in the game right now. If you're just talking, you're not talking about synergies, you're not talking about maps, you're just like, who's the best hero in competitive in terms of just being able to kill people? And the answers are Greymane and Cassia if you look at their win rates. And we've seen some really janky things with Cassia's wins and losses. She won for E-Star Gaming and lost for Kiss. This is not a good like game. We're just going to ignore these basically cancel each other out. E-Star is never going to lose against Kiss. E-Star as a team is 6, 8, 9, 10 months away from Kiss improving enough to even take a game off of them, in my opinion. That's how one-sided these games were. So moving on from China, super perfect team. You see SOA, which is it started over again, is not a team that's usually good enough to take a game off super perfect team. They were really all in on this Cassia strategy. And notice the pairings. We see Cassia with Stitches here, and we see Cassia with Stitches here. Part of that is the fact that it's China, but Fend is insane burst. If you have Fend and a stacked up Surge of Light, and you throw a Q, and you throw your blind, and then all of those things come together, all you need is one follow-up CC to a Stitches hook, and whoever you hook is probably just dead. So Cassia is basically invulnerable unless she's CC'd, because of her trait. Avoidance is just really that strong at negating a lot of damage. People underestimate exactly how much damage comes from auto attacks, even if they are from like mages in here as the Storm. And she doesn't have to deal with that shit at all. She's just like 65% armor, feels good. And CC works really well against her because she can't move. And it also works really well with her because of Fend. So CC drafts are, like, having sufficient CC is going to be a major consideration in every Cassia draft. Not only to have it on your team to give her Fend opportunities, but to deny it to the enemy team. So really, really, really good Stitches hook follow-up, as China keeps demonstrating. Absolutely insane. Superstars, we do see Faye playing and winning with Cassia 3 games in a row. And again, notice the trend here. We have Anubarak stuns into Malfroots. We have Anubarak stuns into Uther stuns into Arthas roots. And we have Muradin stuns into Uther stuns. We have a VP as a reasonable setup. You can even, and in this game we had Divine Storm as well. So we had a big area stun to set up for Fend, which is, almost like a mosh pit. Mosh Pit Fend would be pretty good. Divine Storm Fend is pretty much just as good. The stun is long enough if the Cassia is on point. Of course, they're on comms. They're a professional team. You can kind of assume that is going to be the case. We also see a little bit of blind synergy. I don't think drafting Cassie with other blinds is necessary, but it certainly does not hurt, especially with Ring of the Leech. Picked up at level 4, which was the predominant talent that we did see from most teams. Tempo Storm versus Gale Force Esports. Gale Force lost with it. They did have the stun set up. And honestly, I don't think they should have lost this game. I don't think the Cassia play was very strong. I think Cassia should have won this game based on the setup. I just don't think they used it effectively enough. And it's just one of those things. It takes a lot of practice individually for the person who's playing the hero, and it takes a lot of practice with the team to consistently set these up. Superstars has always been kind of a wombo team because of the style of their play. Stray really likes going for pick comps. He always has, even though he's not drafting anymore. The trifecta of Superstars has been together for a long time, so they work really well together. They are a smoothly oiled machine when it comes to setting up picks. That communication between Stray and Faye has been going on for so long that it's just really, really, really solid. And I don't know why Gale Force just didn't quite have that same level of execution, but I don't know. I keep hearing that people underestimate physical armor and how much auto attack damage is done, and that's how valuable it is. Yet I also keep hearing people say that everyone underestimates how much ability damage is done and how much valuable spell armor is. Is one really significantly better than the other, or is this the case where people underestimate the value of armor in general, so both are undervalued? People underestimate the armor value of armor in general, just period. But this people at a lower level of play underestimate how much damage is from auto attacks because they don't stutter step. If you watch bronze to platinum replays consistently for coaching purposes, you'll notice that they don't stutter step and they actually miss a lot of autos. And if you go through and add it up, they're literally missing thousands of damage a game. If you look at the stats over a 17 to 8 minute game in a pro game versus a bronze game, the experience isn't that different. The amount of experience gained is a little different, but it's not hugely different. But the amount of damage that's done is hugely different. Part of that comes down to missing skill shots, but a huge part of it actually comes down to auto attacks. So players below a certain level underestimate the amount of auto attack damage that happens in an average game because they're not hitting those auto attacks. They're not underestimating it. It actually just doesn't exist for them. They only have really their perspective to work with. And even if they're watching streams, they might be like, oh yeah, he's stutter stepping. And that might not translate to them that every time someone like Fan executes this perfect stutter step, he's adding 80 to 200 damage to his final total. And he's doing it once a second. It's an 18-minute game. Once a second. It adds up. So people who don't stutter step underestimate the amount of damage that auto attacks add up to on any hero. That's just, and lower leagues tend to not stutter step as much. People underestimate spell armor because they don't realize that almost every ability in the game where you push a button does ability damage. So multi-shot, Vala, people think of Vala as an auto attacker. 50% of Vala's damage comes from her W button and her Q button, more or less with different builds, but it's really comes down to hero specific. I think Zul'jin and Raynor are really the only two heroes where most of their damage comes from auto attacking. 70, 80, 90% of their damage comes from auto attacking. Every other hero is pretty. Most of the other auto attack heroes are pretty balanced. 50 to 70% of their damage comes from auto attacks, and the rest comes from abilities. And then mages, 70% of their damage comes from abilities, but 10 to 30% of it can easily come from auto attacks. And people just don't make that distinction enough. So, and also armor is just really undervalued. People think 25% armor. I'm taking 25% less damage. 50% armor makes you twice as survivable. 75% armor makes you 4 times as survivable. Each point of armor is more valuable than the point before it. So people really underestimate how strong armor is because they're just it's 25% less damage, not realizing that it increases your effective health by 30-some%. It's a huge deal. Is the reason that experience isn't that different because in bronze you see games with 15 kills on each side but they don't soak, and in pro games they aren't as high skills but they soak? I would have to do the math to confirm that is that is why that happens. I'm not going to do the math, but I've noticed solo tank Arthas or even just main tank Arthas versus bruiser Arthas becoming more of a thing. Is there a situation where this is a good pick? The only time, so Arthas doesn't have initiation, straight up. You can't consider root initiation against good players. It doesn't work because they just dodge. The animation for it is really noticeable. It has a 1 second wind up. If they have any sort of movement ability, you can initiate it with root against a tank. You can root Johanna all day. She'll just iron skin it. You can root Muradin. He'll just be okay. And then he pops Avatar or jumps away. But you can't initiate on a Vala. She'll always vault the root if she's good. I've actually yet to see a professional Vala player get rooted as an initiation. They vault it 100% of the time. The exceptions have all been in really narrow corridors, or if someone else on Arthas' team forced vault to be burned, and then the root was the follow-up to vault. Syndragosa is a really good engage mechanic, but it's a really long cooldown, and you better win that fight. That's all I gotta say. So, and Syndragosa only really works over fixed point objectives. So if you're gonna Arthas as a main tank, you need to go Syndragosa. You need to tempo out a win with Syndragosa, and it needs to be on a map where fighting over a fixed point objective matters a shitload, which means Infernal Shrines or Battlefield of Eternity. Those are the only two. Someone actually in my chat did a win rate analysis on Arthas in competitive play as a main tank. Not as a solo tank necessarily, but as a main tank. His win rate is dumpster tier. Teams that draft Arthas that way either don't win or only win because they're literally a number 1 team versus a number 6 team. So I think we have enough data at this point to say that you shouldn't draft Arthas as a tank. And I've been saying that literally since Arthas got reworked, that Arthas is not a tank. And if you draft him as a tank, you're going to have a lot of problems. And I think we actually did the analysis yesterday, so it's up to date with the current stats for the weekend. Arthas basically doesn't win games unless you're substantially better than the other team as a tank. He wins games as a bruiser. Is there a way to climb up the ranks through doing great macro if you can't seem to get better mechanically? If so, what kinds of macro decisions would make the biggest difference to win games? Yeah, draft wave clear heroes and encourage your team to draft wave clear heroes. I climbed on the Korean ladder playing literally nothing but Zool from gold to high plat. And I just cleared a wave and rotated. And cleared a wave and rotated. Cleared a wave and rotated. That's all I did. If you draft heroes with wave clear, you're never going to be in a situation where you're going to fall behind in soak. You might fall behind in other things, but you're never going to fall behind in soak. Nostromia, when she did her bronze to Grandmaster run, played 80% of her games as Falstad because it was wave clear plus global plus this is a stupid fight, we're leaving, right? Gust. If you really think that you have better decision making than everyone else that you're playing with at whatever rank you are, and you just have bad mechanics, play Falstad, soak, play Dahaka, soak, wave clear plus global. Maybe not Dahaka after the patch, but currently, right now. You know it's more tilting than a team drafting Arthas as a main tank? When a team drafts both Arthas and a noob, and they put the tank player on Arthas and the melee or flex on a noob. Yeah, that's happened in NA. We're not talking about that. That could have been a comfort thing, but it was pretty obvious that the team was reacting to the tank positioning and not the bruiser positioning. People pay attention to where their tank is standing, especially in competitive play. So having your bruiser player on your tank, it screws up your entire team fight dynamic. It's not a good thing to do. Going back to Cassia, these are actually really good questions. You guys can keep interjecting. I'm just going to talk about Cassia because I wanted to. Again, Dignitas lost, had the blind synergy, but notice the lack of initiation. We just talked about this. Arthas, no initiation. Dahaka, no initiation. Double support. I think Cassia can be a solo range for comp. I actually said this weekend that she couldn't be. But after watching these games, I've changed my mind. Cassia can be a solo range as long as she has good initiation. And when you watch this game, Dignitas versus Fnatic, it's funny. You'll see Cassia actually going in and trying to secure kills and doing a ton of damage. And then she just dies because she literally left her tanks behind. They were just like way back there. And it happened more than once. It happened so much that I was like starting to giggle a little bit every time that it happened. And it just was really unfortunate. But Cassia needs someone to initiate for her to be really, really good, especially because she has that limited range. So she always needs someone standing in front of her, but that person also needs to be able to initiate so she can have that big burst follow-up. It doesn't work. Mighty vs. Tempest was kind of a weird game, but this is something we've seen. I want to almost call this cheesy though, and this is something we've seen. I think it was Mighty did this in. I'm thinking of a different team. One second, guys. I'm gonna remember who did this comp. It might have been an open team. What am I thinking of? No, it was Mighty. Okay, it was Mighty. They didn't end up winning this game, but this was like, look at the amount of lockdown they have here. This was like so cheesy. And they actually, to some degree, beat Tempest in the early game. Let's see if we can. Yeah, we can bring this up. But what about Valkyrie's initiation? Valkyrie is dodgeable. It has such a big wind up, the animation's very obvious. Literally all I have to do is like click sideways and you're just out of Valkyrie. Valkyrie is a really good follow-up. We've actually seen some cool things with Valkyrie in terms of initiation as a follow-up for pick comps. Because if someone's safe at their gate, let's say someone is right here, and Muradin, we see Cassia come around the side here, Muradin jumps over the wall, hits the stun, and then Cassia gets to here and Valkyries. That person's dead. There's no way that person gets all the way back to their towers unless they have a massive escape ability, right? It doesn't happen. So Valkyrie's a really good follow-up to an initiation, which your tank needs to be able to do on their own. Let's see if I can find it. There was one fight bottom where silliness happened. It's just the one pick, but it gives you an idea of how strong. Charism goes down. I can't find it. But basically, Mighty was almost, in my mind, trying to cheese with this combination of EDC initiation stun into root, into Kerrigan combo, all of which, like if you add them all up, have enough duration where Fend is going to get maximum value. And anytime it worked, they got the pick, but Tempest was really careful about positioning, making sure that, you know, the right people were not out of position. And it didn't work often enough. But kind of cheesy. I wish I had time-stamped the fight I was thinking of so I could go do it for you guys. But yeah, I genuinely think Cassia is insane. But she has some really specific requirements in terms of needing to be with her team for the most part, really needing an initiation to follow up on, and you need to make sure whatever comp you have something that's going to give you Fend value. Chinese are focusing on Stitches because that's just very much in their meta. We see the Korean teams focusing on ETC as initiation or Muradin. Both of those are totally fine as long as there's a follow-up CC, but Malf is always, you know, an option in drafts. And we see the losses of Cassia tend to be either really one-sided because the teams weren't very evenly matched, or they lacked initiation for the Cassia pick. And Cassia just couldn't essentially do her job as this... I want to call her a skirmisher. I don't know. She's not, in my mind, really a ranged hero. She's not really a melee hero. She's sort of a skirmisher. She's sort of someone who weaves in and out of fights and always wants to be moving. And I think that's where we're going to see her more and more and more as people understand her strengths and weaknesses better. Watching the games from this weekend gave me a really good insight into where she's going to be in the meta and how team dependent she is to secure kills. But if your team's working with you, she can always like win you fights. It's kind of a big deal. All right. So that's all I had. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the HGC Post-Show number 4. If there's any last-minute questions, I'd be happy to take them. Otherwise, we may just switch over to doing some PTR stuff. I haven't tested Dahaka yet, and I really want to test how his solo lane matchups work. Would you say both Cassia and Tychus play the same skirmisher role due to low range? Tychus has a lot more chase potential because of overkill, and he has Odin. So he has a lot of zoning potential in massive team fight or in team fights that matter because of Odin and the amount of just pressure that puts onto people. So Tychus is a little different. Also, Tychus has more health, and Cassia has more survivability, but only if she's moving. They both have pretty effective wave clear. Fend is pretty effective wave clear. Overkill is pretty effective wave clear. So they're tied in that department. But Tychus has some distinct advantages and some distinct disadvantages. I don't think there's any hero that's comparable to Cassia. I think Cassia is a classification unto herself right now. How do I feel about Cassia's self-healing? Cassia's self-healing is really good. I think Ring of the Leech is the talent to pick in 90% of cases. We did see the blind talent picked up in a couple of games, where if you get stunned or rooted, you cast blind around your area around you and increases the area significantly. I like that. In some cases. Will you do more Korean casts? Yeah, if people want me to do a cast of more of the Korean games, I can absolutely do that. Any insight on the rise in Abathur and popularity in Part 2? It's not even just Part 2. Abathur's just been climbing. Abathur got buffed. It took people a while to realize how strong he is. But as people started drafting better and started realizing that HOTS is a very deep strategic game, took some reasons a little bit longer than others, and not missing soak ever is kind of valuable. Always having lane pressure on Towers of Doom and Curse Hollow is kind of valuable. Abathur just saw a rise. Also, the return of Greymane. Anytime the Greymane's in a meta, Abathur's going to be in the meta because double Greymane is terrifying. Buffs to Zeratul, same thing. Anytime Zeratul's in a meta, Abathur's going to be in the meta because the pick potential with the hat and double Zeratul getting into your backline, one of whom doesn't worry about dying at all, is just absolutely terrifying. Also, a lot of people were anticipating double support comps. In any double support meta, split pushing wins more so than team fighting because you're not going to beat the double support comp in a team fight unless you also draft double support, and that's just... no one wants to play that game. So a lot of people were like, okay, well, you draft double support, we'll draft Abathur. Also, by drafting Abathur, the other team who understands the game is going to be like, okay, well, we can't draft double support, we just lose. So let's not draft double support. So anytime you pick Abathur, you're saying, oh, they can't draft double support. Seems good. And then you don't have to play that game. Which is pretty good. That exact same question got asked last week. Everyone always wants to know what's going on with Abathur. Abathur is a popular guy. All right, and that will be it for the HGC Post-Show number 4. Thank you all for watching. Really appreciate it. And we'll see you all next week. And that'll be a good cut for the